Morning, Gavin. Sorry.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Oh no, we can't wait. So this is a bit of a rapid fire critical conversations, we're calling these, from Climate Action for Associations. And literally for London Climate Action Week, we wanted to give a really good and brief overview of the great work that associations are doing in relation to climate action, both internally and also to support their membership. And we thought, who better to start the conversations off with than yourself? So I'm going to introduce you, if that's all right. Do you mind?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay, so everybody who's listening in, this is Gavin Hayes, and he's Head of Policy and External Affairs at the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. The Chartered IIA is the professional body exclusively for internal audit in the UK. With a royal charter, the Chartered Institute has 10,000 members, a much bigger community than that, obviously, and represents the voice of the internal audit profession. The Chartered Institute trains, develops and represents the entire internal audit profession, and it's obviously delivers learning, content, information, guidance. And I know, Gavin, you head up the research and policy part of the business at Chartered IIA. But I wanted to kickstart this quick conversation because I know we're only going to give ourselves 10, 15 minutes for these. But tell us about internal audit. Then why internal audit? What role does internal audit have to play, or what role do your members play in the climate change or the climate action, business action agenda?
Yeah, thanks, Ali, for that introduction. Well, basically, the role of internal auditors is to provide independent assurance that organisations are identifying, managing and mitigating their business critical risks to support their long-term sustainability. And we know that the most dynamic business critical risk that is moving up internal audit's agenda is in fact climate change. And this is evidenced by our annual Risk in Focus poll, which is based on the views of over 700 chief audit executives working across Europe. And only a few years ago, only 8% of chief audit executives cited climate a top risk. A couple of years back, it rose to 12%. Last year, it rose again to 22%. And we expect that upward trend to continue long into the future. In fact, when you ask chief audit executives, what are your top 5 risks in just 3 years' time, 41% cite climate risk. But of course, climate change itself isn't a standalone risk. A bit like COVID, it exacerbates a whole plethora of other business critical risks too. So, for example, disasters response and crisis management when climate change results in heat waves or devastating floods or power outages, supply chain risks, regulatory and compliance risks, reputation risks, and internal auditors are at the forefront of ensuring these risks are identified and managed effectively.
That's really interesting. And Gavin, you've been surveying your membership, not just in Risk in Focus, but in other ways to identify what you can do to help, and also what their increasing role in terms of the role that they play internally within their organizations. Have you got a sense of what and how the role of the internal auditor is going to manifest over the next 5 to 10 years? So I don't know, project to 2030, what does the role of internal audit look like then? And do you feel like it's much more integrated approach where climate risk and climate action will be fully part of their role and job description? How do you see it playing out?
I think that climate change will increasingly become an integral part of an internal auditor's role in the future, because as I say, the role of internal audit is to help support the long-term sustainability of organizations. And increasingly, that doesn't just mean their financial sustainability, but it also means their environmental sustainability. And I believe that internal auditors do have a vital role to play in the transition to a carbon neutral economy and to support their organizations to take climate action. And we can see that there are a range of ways that internal auditors are already supporting this. So many internal auditors in the financial services sector are already involved in supporting, the climate stress tests that have been recently introduced by the Bank of England. And from April 2022, the government is introducing mandatory climate-related financial reporting based on the TCFD framework. And there will be a really important role for internal audit in supporting this. Obviously, we've got COP26, the Climate Change Summit, coming up in Glasgow, coming up in November. And I think it's likely that we're going to see, more stringent climate-related regulation coming out of that. And again, there's going to be an important role for internal auditors in supporting organizations to meet some of those new regulatory requirements. So yeah, I think increasingly climate risk is going to become an integral part of what internal auditors do.
And will you be delivering, as an institute, will you be starting to think about, if you're not already delivering, skills and related training and information and guidance to support the members in this area? I know that you're sort of running quite a lot of research and you're developing lots of insights. What's the plan? Do you have a plan externally yet to how you're really going to support the profession, advance their role, and I guess their business partnering with other key stakeholders in the business, not to mention how they engage and influence the board? What's your thoughts around that?
Well, in terms of the steps that we are taking as an institute, as you know, Ali, over the last year, we've had a really strong focus on climate risk. So, last year, we published our organization's preparedness for climate change piece in partnership with the Climate Group. And, the purpose of that thought leadership report was to help ensure that climate change risk is firmly on internal audit's agenda and to encourage more work in this area, including sharing best practice. And this year, in the run-up to COP26, we'll be publishing a new climate change piece, which will be a good sustainability governance guide for audit committees and directors in partnership with the British Standards Institute. And the purpose of this piece is to encourage audit committee members and company directors to harness the skills of their internal audit functions in managing and mitigating climate risk. And, that close relationship between internal audit and the audit committee is just so fundamental to the work that internal auditors do. And of course, we've recently signed up to climate action for associations to support the Institute's own journey to net zero. And as part of this, we have now established our internal climate action working group to oversee the development and implementation of our climate action plan. And then in terms of supporting the profession, we are developing new training courses and technical guidance to support the profession in auditing climate risk. Yeah.
I think what's really great about the Institute, Gavin, is that you've really taken, I guess, the bull by the horns and really charged ahead over the last, since we've been working with you, 6 to 12 months, really, around all the research, even though it's been an increasingly higher risk on the risk in focus register that you produce. Just literally over the last year or so, you're really starting to tackle this. And I think you're a really good inspiration and a really good example of a membership body who is actually really trying to take really proactive steps in addressing change, which is fantastic. And obviously that's the reason why we're having these conversations over the next week, is to highlight and showcase the great work that membership bodies are doing. And obviously my colleagues over at B2B developing some great partnerships as well to support the Institute, to help you obviously tap into some industry information and know-how that perhaps the Institute doesn't have itself. So partnerships play a massive part in all of this. So in terms of your own work internally, like it's fantastic that the Child Institute Internal Audit is part of Climate Action for Associations. But in terms of your next steps internally, if you could share a little bit around, because I know it's early days in terms of the action plan and the steps that you're taking. But so far, in terms of your thinking internally around your own institute, so how many, just to give those listening an example, how many staff do you have?
We have around 30 members of staff who are all obviously working from home at the moment.
Yeah, so you're a small organisation in your own right. You're an SME, which is quite typical for membership organisations in the UK in particular. So if you could leave us with some takeaways, I think it would be really good for those that are listening in to understand what your plans are in the next, I guess, upcoming months, and the steps that you intend to take. And I know it's really early days, and we're just about to have a planning workshop with the Institute to help sort of set those wheels in motion. But what else are you doing that you could just sort of leave some last few inspiring thoughts potentially to those that are listening in?
Yeah, sure. So the Institute's first climate action working group meeting will in fact take place tomorrow, which is obviously very timely. So this week should be a really exciting week for the Institute in terms of climate action. And I think after that meeting, the next step is that we will be putting a motion to our council, which is effectively the board of the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, committing the organisation on its journey to net zero. And then, the purpose of the Climate Action Working Group will then be to oversee and develop that plan. And I would just like to say, in fact, that I have found the resources on climate action for associations just immensely helpful. As the Institute's climate change champion, it's just made my job so easy. The simple step-by-step guides, the step-by-step guide to producing a climate action plan. But, then there are other guides on, greening your training and events, and that's going to be a really important aspect of the Institute's road to net zero, green printing policy guide, low carbon travel policy guide. These are all, practical documents and practical guidance that's really going to support the Institute on its road to net zero.
Fantastic. Well, that's really good to hear, Gavin. I guess that's what they're there for. They've been created specifically to support associations of all across all sectors, all sizes, all around the world, to support them in their climate action journey internally, but also starting to obviously trickle down to help support the memberships that associations represent. So many different systems, so many different sectors, but fundamentally we've developed and designed climate action for associations to harness the collective power of associations in the transition to a carbon neutral economy and a safer planet ultimately. So any last takeaways for those listening in? If you could 3 key learnings would be great to leave our audience with. You've literally got 1 minute to go before we sign off. And before we do, can I just say that our next climate Action for Associations critical conversation as part of London Climate Action Week is taking place tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. British Standard Time with Ben Wilmot, who is the head of policy at the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, the CIPD. But Gavin, if you wanted to take us away, you do a song and a dance.
My only last tip is I would just say, if you haven't done so already, do check out the Climate Action for Associations website. Check out the resources and really just get started. It couldn't be more simpler.
Thank you, Gavin, so much. And thanks for that massive shout out. I didn't expect that, but very hugely appreciated. And again, tune in tomorrow morning. We're going to be talking to Ben Wilmot at the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development about what HR and the people profession can do to support organisations in the transition to net zero. See you tomorrow. Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you. Bye.